From the border, it was around 120 kilometers, I think, to Herat, the first city in the west of Afghanistan. And we knew that Herat was safe. We didn't know anything beyond that. We thought we'll get to Herat and then we'll make a plan. But we crossed the border and instantly, because it was 5 o'clock at night, the border guard said, you can't keep going. The Taliban effectively come out at night. And basically what we learned is that during the day, ISAF, so that's the Western forces, they have their checkpoints on the road. They come and pick them up at sunset and leave. And then about an hour later, the Taliban set up their checkpoints. And then overnight, the Taliban are in charge of the road. So the border guard said, you have to stay in this abandoned hotel. And it was really surreal. It was this huge hotel with about 100 rooms. It was shot to pieces. Bits of the roof were missing. There was no innkeeper. And I remember, we could pick any room we wanted because there was no one there. And we ended up having a little sort of barbecue on the roof, I think, looking out into the desert into Afghanistan. And I remember that was by far one of the most exciting sort of moments of my life, was looking ahead into, that was real unknown about what the next few weeks would be like.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello everyone, welcome to the show. It's Bella here, host of Seek Travel Ride. Something that always strikes me when I interview guests who have had so many vast experiences travelling the world on a bicycle is that it's really hard to condense a lot of those experiences into just one short episode. This was certainly the case when I recorded the interview with Jude, and so it is that I have decided to take some extra time with him and share his stories over 2 episodes. When I recorded with Jude, we ended up speaking for over 3 hours, and I certainly appreciated him sharing all that time with me. But I realised this is going to be a big ask to have my listeners be able to listen to such a long podcast session. So I took the decision to specifically conduct the interview in 2 pieces. And so the episode this week will primarily deal with the experiences that Jude had on his first long-distance journey, which took him all the way from England to India. Episode 2, which I will release to you next week, goes into the experiences that Jude had on his most recent journey through West Africa. You'll hear some excerpts about that journey during this first part episode as well. And I'm sure that you will be very, very excited to hear about those experiences too. But I just thought it would be a disservice to Jude to not have his full experiences shared. So definitely keep an eye out for that release next week. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy episode 1 with Jude. And without any further ado, let's get into it. Hello! I'm your host, Bella Malloy, and I'm excited to introduce my guest for today's episode of Seek Travel Ride, Jude Kriwald. In June 2012, Jude set off on a bicycle tour that would take him from his home in England all the way across to India. This journey would see him embarking on an adventure to some of the most remote areas in the world. He would cycle through Afghanistan, observing life in a country many of us have only come to understand through news bulletins. Jude travelled through Central Asia during the middle of winter, traversing snow-covered roads and camping in ice-cold temperatures, sometimes as low as minus 30 degrees, as he traversed across the high mountain passes on the Pamir Highway. Then, in the very essence of taking the road less travelled, and without a visa, Jude spent 30 days cycling through Tibet. No doubt an adventure like this would be transformational, and I can only wonder what it would have been like to return back to London, having experienced so much during this journey. Then, over 10 years later, in 2023, Jude set off on another bicycle tour, this time choosing to make his way slowly through West Africa. Here, Jude cycled through countries many Westerners never visit and to areas far flung away from the typical tourist trail. In contrast to Jude's first big cycle tour to India, in West Africa, he would be dealing with oppressive heat, often upwards of 40 degrees. His route often taking him onto dusty dirt roads, muddy tracks, and a fair bit of bush bashing as well. But it would be 3 days spent deep in the Liberian jungle that would leave the deepest impression on Jude. All I can say is settle in, listeners. This will no doubt be quite the journey for us as we get into the details of these two amazing adventures. Jude Kriwald, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm really pumped to learn more about your experiences from these two massive journeys, Jude. But the question which I start my show with, and I ask this of all my guests, is, Jude, do you remember the very first bike you ever rode?
I love this. This brought back so many memories thinking about this and listening to this and your other episodes. I don't know if it was the first one I ever rode, but I remember the first one that I was super excited about. It was a Christmas present. I must have been 3 or 4 years old. No, maybe 5 or 6. And it was wrapped up in newspaper next to the Christmas tree. And that in itself was just so exciting. I was like, wow, my bike now is big enough that my parents can't use wrapping paper. It has to be newspaper. It was a green rally. It was sort of, sold as a mountain bike. I don't think it had any suspension, but I in my head, it was a mountain bike. And the main thing I remember about this bike is doing that thing where you crush a soft drink can and then you bend it over the rear tire, and then it sounds like you're on a motorbike, and it sort of roars as you cycle along, and just whizzing up and down the lane next to my house, thinking I was, going super fast. That was a good bike.
Oh, what a super memory. But you're right, though. Like, as a kid, who cares whether it's got suspension or not? It's a mountain bike. You're equipped for adventure now. I wonder, Jude, I've thought about this a lot before pressing record for the show. You've taken some amazing journeys, and I actually wondered what sparks that off in someone. And a theory I have in my mind is, what sort of journeys were you taking when you were younger growing up? What sort of adventures were you taking then, and how did the outdoors feature for you growing up?
Yeah, really interesting question. The initial bigger question of, what sparks it is something I don't fully have an articulate answer for. But growing up, I honestly think this desire to, that started at 19 to cycle to India, it came in my teenage years. I don't remember it from childhood. I had relatively normal upbringing. We went on holidays, but they weren't big adventure holidays. They were, a beach resort or whatever it may be. But I remember around 16 years old, I just dropped out of school, and I dropped out of school thinking I wanted to go traveling, but my mum said I'm not allowed to travel till I'm 18. So I just sit at home all night planning up trips, many of which I never did because they were 2 years away. And by the time I got there, a different trip had come up. But I just always had this feeling of, I just have to explore. It's just about exploring, and just this idea that there is so much, wonder to be found out there, and that it sort of blew my mind how we were set up to never go and find it. But it wasn't super conscious. It was just this really deep feeling of, I've got to go. Which is, it's a bit like that line from On the Road where, I don't know if it's Sal's the character's name. He says, we've got to go. And then his mate says, well, where are we going? And he says, I don't know, but we've got to keep going till we get there. And it's this sort of this idea. So the most romantic sort of beatnik idea of travel, of there's something out there, I don't know what it is, but let's go find it.
There's one thing to want to go and travel to the other side of the world, but choosing to travel in a slow travel mindset. What about that for you? We live in a time where we could get on a jet plane and go to most places now. And when we get to them, we can choose a different way of getting around and even what we see and observe. But you've chosen slow travel as the way that you want to observe things. How did that come for you?
Yeah, I think it was, related to the last question, it wasn't that I just wanted to travel because I wanted to go and meet people and see places. It came from this feeling of wanting to be somewhere deep in the wild, in the same way that some people are like, I want to go to the moon and know what it's like on the moon. I would look at a map of the Pamirs. This is literally how the England to India trip was dreamt up. I'd look at a map of the Pamirs and I'd think, what's it like to be there? And then I'd look at, a jeep track, which is the only road going through the Pamirs. And I think, wow, that's quite remote. Then I'd look at the valley over where there's no track. And I thought, what's it like to be there, even more remote? How many people go there? What's it like to sit there and just be with those mountains that are sort of, virtually unchanged for so long? And that sort of brought this idea of, well, I'd like to cycle around the Pamirs because that way I'm independent. There's probably also a very practical element of it's affordable. I couldn't afford to go on an organized jeep tour of the Pamirs for a week. Not at 19. Like, it took me a year or two to save up for that trip. So the bicycle was, I think I just thought, let's mountain bike around the Pamirs. And then it came to, well, how am I going to get to the Pamirs? And something just clicked. And I said, I'll cycle there. And then for some reason, it didn't seem like a good enough finish point. So I decided to finish in India.
Because that was going to be my next question. The Pamirs and India is your endpoint. Like, there is a bit of a connection to get from one to the other. The highway doesn't lead you there.
No.
Was India just, that sounds like a great stopping point? Actually, if I channel back further or rephrase that question for you, Jude, were you time restricted when you were planning this trip, and were you thinking, this is how far I could get?
No, I don't think I was particularly time restricted. I think I was budget restricted. But that didn't feel like the biggest element. I think actually at that time, it was relatively hard to cycle past India. If you stayed in China, you could go, and in the north and central China, you go all the way east to Southeast Asia. But from India, the borders to sort of Bangladesh and then Myanmar, Bhutan, they were all very difficult countries to cross into. And I'd been to India the year before just backpacking, which is where I got my first flavor of adventure cycling, just for one day. And so I think India was a big enough destination in itself. I thought I'll finish there. I'd been to Kashmir the year before, and I just thought I'll go there because I know that's a great place to end up.
I wonder if, like, the Kashmir you had discovered the year before, just through the experiences that you had then going after that, through that long period of travel, what it was like for you reliving a familiar place but with maybe different sort of experiences, changing the way you had a view on a point as well.
Yeah, it was such a treat. And actually, I owe a lot to that experience in Kashmir the first time around. So I was backpacking. I was 18 years old. I was with a lot of my friends who were doing a gap year, but I wasn't going to university. So just sort of gap life year for me. And I was in this group of friends. And the story is that basically there was a bit of I'd sort of fallen for this girl in my group, but my heart got all confused, blah, blah, blah. And I ran away to Kashmir, basically. I left a note. I was, young and foolish, and ran away to Kashmir thinking it solved my problems. Got on the first flight I could from Delhi to Kashmir, left her a note, and then felt awful about it, called her and apologized. But then I was in Kashmir free to have an adventure, and I had sort of a week there. I took this jeep up Kardungla, which is was sort of marketed as the highest road in the world. I think it's 5,600 or something meters. And then on the way back, coming back over this pass a few days later, there was a big traffic jam effectively because one of the trucks was sliding off, and it's really treacherous, really icy up there. And just happened to have a mountain bike on the roof of the Jeep. And I just thought, well, sod this, I'm going to get on the bike. So I cycled the last sort of 200 meters up to the top of the pass. But bear in mind, I wasn't prepared for this at all. I just had a woolly jumper, thin, those sort of trousers you get from Goa, and just normal shoes. And then I cycled down, I just cruised down from 5,680 meters to Leh, which is around 3,000 meters. And it was one of the most exciting but also dangerous times of my life, in that everything started to go cloudy at one point. And I thought, oh, wow, the clouds are really coming in. And I only realized later I was getting windburn in my eyes. I hit a rock at one point and my front wheel flew up. And thankfully I went to the right towards the mountain. But if I'd gone to the left, it would have been off the edge of a cliff. But by the time I got down to the bottom, I just thought that was so exciting. And ever since then, I've been obsessed with high altitude cycling. And it was being in Kashmir, which is, so Kashmir is sort of behind, they call it a rain shadow, a snow shadow. So all the mountains there, a lot of them, they don't have any snow on the top because the rest of the Himalayas block the clouds. It just means you've got these stark mountains which are just rock the whole way. And they're just really sort of strong and inspiring to look at. And that's where I thought, where can I get more of this? And then I heard about the Pamirs, which is quite similar. That's a very sort of long answer as to the link between going to Kashmir and the whole trip being born.
I just feel with those landscapes, and so much of your travels, Jude, would be in these landscapes. You know, when you're in nature and it's so massive like that, you must feel so like a tiny, tiny, tiny in comparison to it. One of my passions is photography, and I am especially a mountain lover. That's why I've chosen to live in the mountains, and it never ceases to impress me just how big nature is and how small we are when we're there. And sometimes the turn of weather really, really puts it starkly in mind as well, just how quickly things can change from one time to the next.
Yeah, yeah.
When I talk about weather there, something that struck me was you were in Central Asia in winter.
Yeah.
I've had the real privilege of interviewing a few people who've travelled on the Pamir Highway. They've travelled through Central Asia. Some have gone as far as India. Some have gone, as far as Singapore, Australia. Some have gone around the world. And I don't think I've come across any that went there in wintertime. But you definitely did. Was that part of this adventurous spirit and this plan of seeing a landscape at its most oppressive, or was it just not a factor at all when you set out?
Well, no, you've actually reminded me about your previous question about being time-bound. The initial plan was to get to India in 6 months rather than 13 because I thought, well, I need to cross the Pamirs before winter. But I had just such a good time on my way and stopped so often that it quickly became clear that I wasn't going to reach the Pamirs in time to beat the winter. In Istanbul, I met a Spanish guy, Agustin. He was cycling Spain to Australia. And we cycled together for a bit in Turkey, Iran and Afghanistan. And in Tehran, we were in Tehran in maybe October, November. And there's a big mountaineering community in Iran. And so we went to the mountaineering shops and we bought winter equipment to cross the Pamirs. We actually crossed separately, totally different. I think he was a month ahead of me and he went around. Actually, he didn't go through them. But we thought, let's do this. This should be possible. So it wasn't part of the plan initially, but it very much became part of the plan. And it was, I think by that point, I'd really got this feeling of, God, like so much is really possible if you prepare and believe. You need the two of them. You can't just hope and believe, hope/believe. You really need to prepare. And I think one of, my strongest points is that I research the hell out of everything to a fault. Sometimes I just need to, put the computer down and go outside. But I thought it should be possible. And it was actually my third attempt to find a road through the Pamirs. I found one that wasn't snowed over. And it was just the best thing ever.
We've skipped so far ahead on this journey, and journey number 1, you've taken 2. And I don't want to skip straight to the Pamirs in Central Asia. I want to actually take you back to just prepping for it. So we've had a bit of an insight. I understand your motivations clearly now. And I understand the landscapes you were seeking out. And I guess, without wanting to overuse the word, the adventure and experiences you were looking for as well. But setting off as well, bar that day on a bike in Kashmir, bike travelling and touring on a bike long distance, this wasn't something you did have experience in, really, was it?
No, I'd literally never done it. I'd once cycled 30 kilometers to a festival with a tent strapped on the back of my bike, but I wouldn't even call that bike touring. I'd never done it. I did one night about a month before I left where I cycled out to the forest to test all my gear. I remember being so scared in my tent, the sounds of rabbits and horses walking past, and I was just constantly thinking, someone's out to get me. I was so not used to it. But I'd never done it before. But again, I guess I really hadn't realised this. In fact, I hadn't realised this until not long ago, that I'd always turned to the bicycle, but in a small, nondescript adventure way, like at school. I sometimes struggled to not fit in socially, but I was always getting in trouble at school. And I didn't really realise until I looked back that I'd often just take my bike and cycle out into the hills, which really wasn't allowed. It was a boarding school and you were meant to stay within the grounds. But that adventurous streak with the bike was somewhat there, even though it was never a tour and I never named it. I never even talked about it, but I'd always just disappear on the bike. Yeah, even though I didn't recognise it starting the trip even, that's something that I like to do.
So then what was it like for the first part of your trip getting used to traveling in that way? Because it's one thing to like riding your bike and another to, use your bike as a way to escape and just get away from it all. But it's very much another to strap a lot of weight onto it and travel a lot slower with a lot less momentum up an incline on something that you're going to do day after day after day. And that touring fitness doesn't come instantaneously. What were those first few days like? What was the first few weeks like?
Yeah. I remember the first 4 days were the first 4 days were my only 4 days in England, where I cycled from the southwest of England to the ferry in Dover. I had a headache every day, like a really strong headache. And I think it was just, I wasn't used to the exercise. I'd never done exercise like that. But equally, I don't remember this feeling of my legs not being particularly strong and getting stronger. I remember feeling really well equipped. Like I had a decent bike. I loved the feeling of the sort of having all my luggage and everything I need attached to it. And I think, I really enjoyed this idea of everything I need is right here and I'm moving forward with it. I turn the pedals, the bike moves, my tent moves, my food moves. That was so exciting. So apart from being scared in my tent the first couple of months, actually, I stayed scared. I loved the feeling of freedom. I know that's cliched, but that is what it was for me.
I wonder also then, Jude, and I must say, you're certainly not alone in being scared for the first few nights in a tent either. I often wonder, does that fear ever really leave us? Like, do you get scared now in a tent?
No, the fear has largely left, unless I'm somewhere particularly where I think, I really shouldn't be here, or this is a particularly bad area. For me, it was the first 2 months or a month maybe to get to cross the Alps and north of the Alps. So in the UK and in France and northern Austria, I guess, maybe. I was always using my tent. And then obviously once you cross the Alps and I was in Italy, the weather just changed. It was summer and I didn't use my tent anymore. I would look up at the sky when going to sleep. And if I could see the stars, I had no way of checking the forecast. But if I could see the stars, it's probably not going to rain. And I'd say 19 times out of 20, that forecast worked. And then not having my tent around me meant I could see. And when I'd hear the rustling, which is what used to scare me, I'd see there's nothing there. And I sort of learned that way that there's nothing to be scared of. So now when I do have to put the tent up and I hear rustling, I've just sort of got used to not being afraid of that rustling sound, because you're in nature. That's the whole point. And the whole point of nature is that it's not sterile and that it is wild and things move.
Can I ask something? And I realise this is skipping ahead to your most recent trip in West Africa. And I asked this having had the benefit of watching your awesome YouTube videos that you've made from it. You've made 2 so far. Actually, before I forget, just a shout out to your YouTube channel if people want to check these out. How can they find you on YouTube?
Yeah, it's just my name. So you can search for the series is called Alone Across Africa. My YouTube channel is just my name, so Jude Kriwald. And the third episode is going to be coming out pretty soon. It might be out by now, actually.
I'll link to that in the show, listeners, and I definitely recommend the videos. But when you were in Africa, there was a scene, I can't remember if it was in part 1 or part 2, where you were camping and there were animal footprints around you. And
yeah,
what I wanted to ask you there, did it change? Like, did you actually become maybe a little bit nervous if you heard rustling sometimes in that situation?
Yeah.
It's not a cow you're worried about,
No, you're quite right. As I said, in certain situations where there's a real potential threat, then I'd be concerned. And that night it was on the banks of a tributary river to the Gambia, but to be honest, it was just as wide as the Gambia. It was huge. And I'd seen lots of footprints on on the really shallow banks that I was camping on of this river. And I just sort of assumed they were dog footprints or whatever. The reason I was looking for footprints is I was looking for crocodile footprints to check that it was safe. And thankfully I didn't see any croc footprints. But then I was lying there at night, not being able to sleep just because I was awake. I wasn't scared at this point. And I thought, you know what, I'll Google the area I'm in. And it's got its own Wikipedia page, this nature reserve. And it said the line that there are leopards and that hyenas are really common as well. And then I looked up what these footprints of leopards and hyenas look like. And they just matched. I'm not a biologist, but as far as I could tell, they matched the footprints I'd seen. And it said they were really common. And at that point, I was pretty scared and I had a long conversation with myself. I was actually WhatsApping my partner discussing, is it worth moving the tent? Is it not? And in the end, I decided to stick. I put all my food outside quite far away. I put my metal cooking tin, like pan, on top of the food. So if anything was moving it, I'd hear it fall. But yeah, nothing came of it in the end. And I slept really well that night. And I remember waking up, and this is going to sound really weird, and I said it in the video, I was sort of surprised to wake up. Not necessarily because I thought that was it, but because I'd woken up and I hadn't even had a bad night's sleep, you know. But yeah, so there are one or two times where I pushed it maybe, I'd say that's the edge of my comfort zone. It wasn't beyond it, but I definitely took a bit more time to research after that.
There are a lot of people that listen to this show who are planning their own types of adventures, and this is definitely an area which I know does concern people, that idea of wild camping and wild camping on their own. And I think to a lot of people, it's the first barrier they need to overcome. Have you got any tips for people to, how to get over that other than understand everyone goes through it?
Sure. I mean, a very simple practical tip is, the golden rule for wild camping is be out of sight. In particular, be out of sight of the road, which is basically impossible to do in West Africa because it's either dense jungle or it's densely populated, cleared jungle, which is in use. But just about everywhere else I've cycled in Asia and Europe, it's pretty easy to get 100, 200, 300 meters away from the road and out of sight. In my 1 year cycling to India, I was never once bothered. I only in Tibet, which is ironically the most remote place I went to, did I wake up with a Tibetan nomadic boy standing next to my tent, just staring because he could not work out what was going on, but he was no threat at all. So yeah, practically just be out of sight. I guess, yeah, mentally it's just a reminder that, at least for me, I didn't shave for a year. If people see a sort of solo bearded man lying on the floor in a tarpaulin with no tent, they're probably going to be more scared of me than I am of them, which is maybe why no one ever approached me. I do think, there's potentially different considerations for solo female travelers, but I've just found that people tend to leave me alone if I camp out the way. Arrive late, leave early, and you should have a great time.
I mean, I have had the benefit of interviewing a fair few awesome and inspiring solo female travellers. It's certainly inspired me to think about my own solo adventures potentially. And all of them, to a T, have not had concerns wild camping, which is great. Something someone said to me, which sort of was like, oh, okay, is something that us women can actually use in our favour is overwhelmingly, if people see a tent, their default is that it's a guy in there, not a woman. So sometimes even that's just something to think about.
I was just thinking that, yeah, well, if they see a tent, which I used all through Central Asia and Tibet because it was cold, yeah, no one knew my gender. You're quite right. But yeah, I really think most people are not inclined to come up. And again, I would cycle till about an hour before sunset, and then I'd start looking for a place that gives me an hour to cook my pasta, set up my tent, and then I'd finish eating and I'd fall asleep just as it went dark. And then I'd set my alarm for the exact minute sunrise was. It's a great way to get in sync with nature and a very easy way to wake up. And I'd be gone within 30 or 40 minutes before any farmer turns up or dog walkers or whatever it may be. So it was exceptionally rare for me to see anyone while putting away or putting up my tent. I think we have this idea that, because it's this really interesting idea that, this feeling that land we travel on isn't ours and someone else knows it a lot better than us and we're somewhere that we shouldn't be. But it's worth, sort of remembering that this is how, traveling like this is how we survive for tens of thousands of years. And if you can sort of tell yourself that a little bit and practice it until it feels a bit more normal, this idea that you can be at home wherever you put your tent up and your tent is home, and try and shake off this feeling that you're intruding or that you're breaking some laws. Because in most countries, you're not by wild camping. And even in England, I've never had someone approach me or cite the law that I shouldn't be camping somewhere. And once you can shake off that feeling that you're doing something wrong, then it's like, yeah, I'm camping here. This is awesome. I cycled here. How cool is that? I'm going to enjoy it. And then I'm going to leave in the morning and probably no one will even know.
It's interesting that different perspective as well through different cultures as you start getting into different countries and how they perceive you with camping as well. I think it was a guest, Muriel Zakuri. This is way back in some of my earlier episodes last year, but I can't remember what country Muriel was in, but he was asked by someone, why don't they want you to camp here? Like, why is camping bad? And it was purely because he had now arrived in a country where camping was all okay and it wasn't something that you even necessarily had to be so discreet about. It's quite interesting how even cultures perceive differently the notion of camping out there as well.
Yeah.
I did, Jude, come across a photo from your blog of the earlier part of your trip. I'm trying to think, was it in England or was it in Europe? But you camped right next to a massive pile of cow dung at a farm or something. Hello, listeners. It's Bella here, host and producer of Seek Travel Ride. Many of you have recently gotten in touch with me to find out how you might be able to support the show. I am an independent podcaster, which pretty much means I sort of do everything. I research my guests, I interview them, I put their audio together and I do an edit of that, and then obviously I release the episodes and market them as well. It's been a great experience now for just over a year, and we have 60 episodes in the bag as well. But pretty much if you do want to support the show and show some love to the content that I have been producing, I have recently set up a Buy Me a Coffee account. It's just a way that you can financially contribute to the show and put some funds towards the running costs of producing this podcast. I'm very proud to be an independent podcaster, and whilst it does mean there's a lot of work on this show at my end, it's an absolute joy to bring it to you at your end. I have included a link in the show notes to my Buy Me a Coffee account there. So if you want to support the show, just click on that link. Once again, thank you all so much for your support. Now let's get back to the episode.
I camped in some weird places. I actually set up, remember there was a microblogging site, Tumblr, which maybe still exists. My blog doesn't exist on that site anymore. And I set up this Tumblr called Views from My Pillow. And I would just, because I camped in so many great places, either with or without a tent, or all weird places, that every morning I would just take a photo of what I could see from my pillow. And sometimes it was gorgeous mountainscapes or rivers or forests. And sometimes it was, the weirdest one I remember was a huge pile, like sort of 30 meters wide by 10 meters tall, of crushed eggshells in the middle of France. And it had this weird smell to it. But I really took sort of a quirky satisfaction out of camping in odd places. And that's another thing to say is, especially once you're outside of maybe Western Europe, there's loads of buildings you can sleep in, abandoned buildings, sheds, whatever it may be. In the Alps, I'd always sleep in barns. You don't need a tent, you don't need a mattress, just sleep on a pile of hay. And then in developing countries, sadly, there's so many unfinished construction projects where they've built the shell of the building. So you've got 4 walls, you might even have a roof if you're lucky. And then again, you just put the tarp down, put the airbed down, and you're done. So I really enjoyed sort of finding the most sort of varied, I guess, camp spots. And just the other thing I'd say about wild camping and the perceptions of it is that from Turkey onwards, if anyone ever did see me wild camping, or I asked someone, is there a place I can camp? 9 out of 10 people would say, don't camp, come stay with me. Not because they think camping's awful, but because that's how hospitable most of the world is. And so, we have this idea that, I'm doing something bad and I shouldn't be camping. Whereas other people are like, cool, you can camp, but also, why don't you come stay with us? And that's really refreshing and makes you feel more at home and welcome in these otherwise foreign lands.
Again, without a fault, people who have gone on long sort of multi-country expeditions on a bike, the thing that they say when I interview them is it's one of the best parts of their trip is their experiences with people, and to experience that amazing hospitality. I know it definitely came up when I was going through your trip, and this has come up many, many times, just the hospitality shown, in all the countries you went through, but especially in Iran as well. Like, it was just overwhelming hospitality there. The Iranian people, that sort of Persian culture just has that embedded into them. It seems part of their DNA in a way.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. They're such welcoming people, and I've stayed in touch with so many of them because I could have cycled through Iran, including visas and maybe including getting visas in Tehran in maybe 3 or 4 weeks, but I ended up doing 2 months there, which is another reason I missed the summer window for the Pamirs, because everywhere you'd go, without fail, you'd stop in a town at 5 or 6 o'clock and be like, is there somewhere I can camp? And people would just always say, come stay with me. And they'd invite their whole family over and put on a huge feast. And the thing that's interesting about Iran, and it's the same in a lot of developing countries, is from the outside, the houses don't look like all that well kept. But when you go inside, the rugs and the furniture, paintings, and they're stunning. And yeah, the people of Iran were just incredibly hospitable, and they all cited the same chapter from the Quran where Allah says to Muhammad that basically a traveler is a gift to prove yourself as a good person. They're not sort of thinking of it in this really transactional way, that it's really built into their culture. With one exception, I did have one person who once, I was cycling along a road in Iran, and this person flagged me down, almost cut me off, pulled me over, shoved a cake in my hand, and just drove off. At that point, I was like, I feel slightly used here, but also I got free cake, because I knew they were doing it because of their religious beliefs. So it's interesting. It very rarely crosses that line. But yeah, the vast majority of people they just want to help.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back through, photos I've seen from other guests going through Iran, being handed handfuls of cucumbers or melons or all sorts of different food and stuff. I imagine you must have had a similar type of experience there as well.
Yeah. So yeah, in Iran, one of the strangest things I was given was a load of saffron, which is not cheap. Obviously, per gram, it's worth more than gold, saffron. And it's farmed in Iran. And this guy gave me this huge bag of it. He'd been farming. He stopped me on a motorbike, and his whole family was just so happy to see me and insisted on taking photos with me. And I took photos with them. And I think people just love to connect. Wherever you go, that's what a lot of it's about, right? It's about connection. And giving something is just it's a little introduction of like, I want to talk to you. I don't know how to walk up to you and just say hello in your language, but it's a very clear universal language of gifting something.
With that idea of, people want to connect with you, when you're traveling for such a long time on your own, did you also find you were craving that from strangers as well, like that crave for connection? Did you find that?
Yeah, I did. I'm trying to think how much I craved connection. Yeah, I remember quite clearly sort of two almost seemingly opposing thoughts, but actually they're really quite complementary. One is wanting to get really lost in the wild, totally on my own, as far away from anyone as possible. And the other is this huge excitement at the richness that is just, one conversation away from a new person, from a new culture, with a new language, with new beliefs, as in new to me. And I would love stopping, and especially, I definitely felt like I had this a tiny bit more at 19 than I did at 31, although I still had it, but this just sort of starry-eyed gaze at the world of, it's so exciting and I want to learn everything, and that really carried me through a lot of that trip.
Interesting how even the differences from, two trips taken over 10 years apart, there's similarities in places, but there would be differences in the way you're seeking out experiences there as well. I definitely want to dig into that later in the show, Jude. Something I wanted to know, though, was, did you ever, in that first trip, get to a point, were there moments where you just thought, you know what, I've had an adventure and I don't want to keep going? Like, were there ever times where it was just, I don't want to do this anymore?
I don't think so. I'm just racking through the countries in my head. No, I think, and part of the reason the answer is no is that the next country was pretty much always more exciting. Like, I had Europe, which I'd put sort of Western Europe into one block. Greece was getting more adventurous. I was in the mountains and had big dogs. And then Turkey looked really exciting, quite big, empty mountain ranges. And then after that was Iran, which, everyone just has this bad idea of in their heads. And I knew that it might not be like that. And then, from Iran to Afghanistan, a totally different adventure. And then Central Asia and Tajikistan, which was the muse for the whole trip. And then after this most amazing winter in the Pamirs, the challenge of crossing Tibet without a permit. So it was always just going up and up and up in my mind of how exciting this is. And then after Tibet, shoot down through Nepal and finish in India. So it really just built and built and built. And I felt that on this trip, the most recent one in West Africa, of like, oh, this is hard work. And have I chosen the right thing? But I never felt it on the cycle to India.
I wouldn't mind going there. I know listeners were jumping into different trips. But do you think there was a reason or something new for this most recent trip, of that thought of just maybe this is too much?
Yeah, there's a few things. I wanted to go to West Africa somewhat, I talked about having that starry-eyed view of the world before. And I chose West Africa because I felt a little bit jaded in terms of my perceptions of the world. I was sort of 10 years older. The internet and Google Earth and Google Maps means you can get a flavor of anywhere instantly. And rightly or wrongly, and maybe somewhat wrongly, I have perceptions about so many places in the world. I could look at, I don't know, Russia or Chile or South Africa and think, yeah, I know roughly what that's like, what it might be like to be there, what the government's like, and so on. But I knew nothing about West Africa. And equally, I remember having this feeling of when I got to India at the end of the first trip, everyone would sort of point me towards the guest house in India because they're used to travelers. Whereas in Central Asia and Iran, they weren't used to travelers. And so they'd invite you in. And again, for the Africa trip, I wanted to find somewhere where they weren't used to travelers because I wanted to have those rich, engaging conversations of, my gosh, aren't we different to each other? Like, let's learn about each other. What matters to you? What's your life like? And so that's why I chose there. And I did have those experiences in West Africa, but there were also real struggles. There were two main things I struggled with. One was the heat, which I could sort of get over eventually. Really, really hot. And then the second thing is quite an interesting one, and it's a somewhat delicate subject, but cycling through villages in rural West Africa, a lot of people there have never seen a white person before. And most people there don't, in fact, there are no TVs in most villages. They don't have electricity in most villages. The only time they might ever have seen a white person is ever a foreign aid worker coming through, or sometimes when a Premier League match is on, someone will pay for a generator to be turned on and they'll have a projector for 2 hours and they'll watch football. And that might be the only time they ever see a white person. So when I'd cycle through these villages, one kid would start, they'd point and they'd go, white man, white man. And sometimes it'd be in English and sometimes it'd be, I know all the different words that they would use. Tubab, poto, tourist, pumwi. These are all words which effectively mean white man. And sometimes you get the whole village pointing and chanting, white man, white man. And for someone who really just wanted to connect with people, it felt quite othering. Just to be really clear here, I'm explaining my experience. I'm not criticizing the history that's that's happened to get these countries, Sierra Leone, Gambia, and so on, to where they are, especially with, British colonialism is a really complicated one. And we have a lot to answer for. But I can only say how it was at the time, which was I really wanted to connect with people. And I was literally being, pointed at like an animal in the zoo. And it made me think a lot about how we treat each other and how we've historically treated people from Africa. And occasionally I would try and break this and someone would be pointing and shouting, white man, white man. And I'd go up and I'd say, hi, do you want to talk? And they'd sort of snap out and be like, oh, they realize you're a human rather than sort of, objectifying you as this interesting novelty that's, it's like a pig flying through the sky. And so, yeah, I really struggled with that because I really wanted to lean into the connecting with people. It really mattered to me for this trip. But I'd say maybe 1 in 3 times I'd really managed to connect. And 2 out of 3 times it was this sort of fascination that they couldn't get past. And that was quite hard work.
Wow. Not the experience you expected, I could imagine, for sure. Like you could never expect that by any measure. I want to talk then, how when you said with the first trip, it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and built up and built up. Mm. Did you do a lot of pre-research before getting to places? You said it took you a while before you started on this trip from the idea to getting going, but did you find, were you researching a lot about countries? Were there places you specifically wanted to see? Or were you really going in there sort of eyes wide open, just, I can't wait to experience it. There's, no expectation. I just want to see it for what it is. What were your preconceptions going into each country?
Yeah, I did a lot of research for the countries which I knew would be physically more difficult or, somewhat dangerous. So I did a lot of research for the Pamirs because it was going to be winter and trying to work out snowfall levels and which roads are likely to be shut or open. I did a huge amount of research for Tibet because it's illegal to cycle solo through Tibet. It was then and it is now. And I did a fair bit of quite different research for going into Afghanistan. That's all about security. And, I ended up having the British Foreign Office sending me daily reports of intelligence. And I swear I shouldn't have been getting it, that it should have been classified. It was things like reports today of a Hilux coming in with 3 Taliban with 2 RPGs in the back, entered Kabul at this time, wearing these clothes. And I'll just be thinking, oh my gosh, what do I do with this information?
Every time a Hilux drives past, you'd be far out.
But yeah, I think to answer it a bit more in depth, I guess. Yeah, the research was a really important part of the trip. It's why I felt confident that I could do it. The first thing I did when I decided I was going to cycle to India was buy a map of the Pamirs, because that was, as I said, that was the muse for the trip. And I really find that it's not only sort of research to understand, oh, is it possible, and what are my risks and mitigations? For me, the research is the inspiring bit. That's the bit where I think, wow, what's it? Because you have to think, for risk's sake, what's it going to be like being there? But that's also the fun bit. It's like, what's it going to be like? That's really exciting. And so, yeah, I would really enjoy that research. And I'd also say it's so different now researching these places compared to in 2012. There's just so much more information out there, communities of people. In a way, it's a great thing and it makes it more accessible. In a way, on the other hand, it makes it slightly less romantic. It feels like there's maybe slightly less to discover for oneself, but that's always an individual choice.
I've had two guests who I would classify as really long time world travellers in slow travel, human powered travel. One would be Peter Gostelow and the other one is Nikolai Bangsgaard. And both of them have sort of commented on the differences since they started out on this journey, both of them travelling in this manner nearly now for the best part of 2 decades. And Peter Gostelow, his comment was his interactions with people on his trips now are different because he didn't need to rely on them so heavily to find out about where services are. He has access to that information through the power of a device, a smartphone, the internet. And Nikolai's comment was similar to that as well, but also he reflects back on his first massive trip, which was 4 years long. He didn't take the road less travelled often because he didn't know about it and he didn't know what it would be like in terms of whether something even existed, whereas now mapping technology and software is so much better. He can do that.
Yeah.
Interesting insights, aren't they? For yourself there, Jude, reflecting back from one trip to just over 10 years to the next trip, the differences that you've sort of come across there as well.
Yeah, it's I mean, both those points are really interesting in the sense that the first point about not having to rely so much on people in a way is a great thing, but in a way this something is lost there, having the smartphone. And again, it's kind of like I was saying earlier, like you are less at the mercy of your environment. You have to trust people there less because you can just go on a WhatsApp group for West Africa. There's 300 people in there who cycled West Africa in the last year in a similar manner, and they will have the answer to your question. And for me, that is just not much fun. Like I used it a bit for visas because I think, visas are kind of a boring thing to get wrong. Whereas choosing the sort of wrong road as such, if there is such a thing, is kind of more exciting and part of the trip.
Yeah. I do definitely want to be that person with a lot of curiosity to ask you questions about Afghanistan because, I grew up with Afghanistan as a war-torn country under Taliban rule now. It's a no-go zone. And then to know that I'm interviewing someone who's actually travelled through there, I really want to learn more about it. Was it ever part of your original plan?
No, not at all. The plan was to get to Iran and then do the normal route of, I think it's Uzbekistan first and then Turkmenistan and then into Tajikistan. But I was with this Spanish guy, Agustin, and we were near Mashhad, which is right in the east of Iran on the border with Afghanistan. And again, this sort of spirit we'd had of things just building and more feeling possible every month that went past. And we just sort of look at the map and you go, oh, it's kind of tempting, isn't it? That was literally how it started. This idea of we're not going to be here again. I'm not going to go potentially have the chance to go to Afghanistan again. So it was never in the plan. And in fact, the whole time I was in Afghanistan for maybe 3 weeks, I feel a bit bad about it. I didn't tell my parents. I was sending them updates every other day as if I was in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, being I just crossed here, I just got there, because I didn't want to worry them. And it was only afterwards that I told them, which was obviously a bit of a breach of trust. But I think, having spoken to my mum since, I think I did the right thing.
What was it actually like? Was it actually hard to get into Afghanistan? We were talking about visas and how they can be a process in themselves. And you had some, moments in various countries, whether on this trip or in West Africa, getting visas. Was it hard to actually cross the border? Or is it a case more people are trying to get out than go in? Like, what's that like?
The border was fine. The visa, I do remember. So we did quite a few visas in Tehran. And yeah, the Afghan one was one of the more chaotic ones. We needed a letter of invitation, I think from the British Embassy or something, which obviously we couldn't get. Maybe it wasn't the British Embassy. I'm definitely going to say it wasn't for my sake. Or maybe it was a travel tour company. I ended up making one. I ended up faking it effectively. I did quite a lot of that in Central Asia of, rubber stamps and all this stuff. I had quite a lot of fun with it. I did it for me and Augustine. And yeah, I remember going to the Afghan embassy in Tehran, which was very chaotic, and handing this letter and however many dollars it was. But yeah, the visa wasn't, once you had that letter of invitation, it wasn't too hard. And then crossing the border was as easy as any other, except as soon as we crossed. So basically what we knew was that from the border, it was around 120 kilometers, I think, to Herat, the first city in the west of Afghanistan. And we knew that Herat was safe. We didn't know anything beyond that. We thought we'll get to Herat and then we'll make a plan. But we crossed the border and instantly, because it was 5 o'clock at night, the border guard said, you can't keep going. The Taliban effectively come out at night. And basically what we learned is that during the day, ISAF, so that's the Western forces, they have their checkpoints on the road. They come and pick them up at sunset and leave. And then about an hour later, the Taliban set up their checkpoints. And then overnight, the Taliban are in charge of the road. So the border guard said, you have to stay in this abandoned hotel. And it was really surreal. It was this huge hotel with about 100 rooms. It was shot to pieces. Bits of the roof were missing. There was no innkeeper. And I remember, we could pick any room we wanted because there was no one there. And we ended up having a little sort of barbecue on the roof, I think, looking out into the desert into Afghanistan. And I remember that was by far one of the most exciting sort of moments of my life, was looking ahead into, that was real unknown about what the next few weeks would be like.
You really realise the adventure's gone next level in a way from as soon as you've entered. Even the concept that from day to night, the transition of power on the road's changing as well. You need to stay in this hotel room because the Taliban take control of the roads at nighttime. That's just such that's a concept that you wouldn't have known going in, obviously, right?
Yeah, it was a huge amount of learning and asking and trying to work out who had reliable information. And what I want to say is that Afghanistan isn't, at least when I was there, it's not one of those countries like Iran where, it might have a bad reputation, but actually everyone who goes there says, actually, no, it's fine. Afghanistan wasn't very safe, and it was the limit of it was my limit in terms of safety. And it was the only flight. I took an internal flight to get across part of it. So I didn't cycle all of it, but I did what I always did, which is to ask, does this feel safe? And what can I do to ensure I always feel safe enough? I just want to be clear that I'm not about to sort of dispel the idea that Afghanistan is a dangerous country, because it is. And I think people now are actually visiting. I've met quite a few people in the last few months who are visiting who are visiting Afghanistan as tourists, and the Taliban are sort of being okay with it. That's not travel advice, but it's always changing. And when we were there, it wasn't particularly safe. By the time we got to Kabul, we met so many junior diplomats, and all of them knew at least one person who was currently kidnapped. That was the threat. There was a very low threat of, if you're in the market at the wrong time and a suicide bomber goes off, then that's a threat. But the much more real threat as a white person was from kidnapping. And so we did a lot. My hair by then was quite a light brown, maybe turning sort of dirty blonde from the sun. So I dyed my hair black. I had a big beard. I tried to put brown contact lenses in my eyes, but I actually just couldn't get them in. But I was wearing the full shower kameez, the local dress. I put rice sacks over my panniers so that rather than shiny German Ortlieb, it was just written in Dari rice sacks, and it looked a bit more like a local, I don't know, market boy's bike. So there were things we did, but it was still definitely at my limit.
Yeah, definitely. And did you find, like you said, you took an internal flight while you were there. Did you have moments there where you were thinking, I don't want to be here now? Were you having conversations with Augustine about, we need to get out of here?
No, the conversation was, oh man, this sucks that we're taking a flight. I wanted to cycle the whole way to India. He wanted to cycle the whole way to Australia. It was much more about that. I'd already hitchhiked in a truck at one point in Turkey and little things. But that was a bit of pride to be swallowed. But the flight came around because, we got to Herat and everyone told us, the roads aren't safe. And we actually went to the ISAF airbase. And this is off the back of, a month in Turkey, 2 months in Iran, and then a few days in Afghanistan. So every woman I'd seen for the last 2 months had to, have a full headscarf on. And then we went into this airbase, and there were American and European people everywhere, and including women running around in jogging shorts and their hair loose. And it was such a culture shock, almost the wrong way, not the wrong way around, but the way I'm not used to experiencing, of like, oh my God, like look at everyone wearing what they want to wear, being in Western clothes. And there was a fast food restaurant there and the best internet cafe I'd had on the trip. And basically we went there to ask if we could get a lift on one of their military flights from Herat to Kabul. And we were there for 5 or 6 hours, and the request went up the chain of command and it came back down. And sadly, it was a no. They said the Spanish forces had had casualties that day, so their flights were full. And we ended up paying $100 for a domestic flight to Kabul, which, I spent the whole time looking out the window of the plane, looking down at the mountains, thinking to myself, stupidly, well, I can't see any Taliban. It looks safe. Like, I wish I'd done it. But no, we made the right decision to not push it too far.
No, I mean, you're here now, and maybe you wouldn't be otherwise. We will never know, So, I mean, Afghanistan was an unplanned adventure for this trip, and your trip continued on for so many adventures. We already talked about the fact that you were in the Pamirs in Central Asia during winter. I feel even Canadians would give kudos to the type of winter conditions you were experiencing there. Like, we are talking proper cold at elevation as well. You mentioned that you had prepared, that you did buy equipment that would help you withstand that cold. But what was it like to go from mentally thinking it's going to be like this to actually being in it and experiencing that type of weather as well, and being in those elements up high at such elevation?
I loved it. I think this is a big part of what draws me to adventure, in that there's no better feeling than becoming aware, say back home or months earlier, of something that's really challenging, doing the research to understand what you need to do to overcome those challenges, let's say buying the equipment or putting the work in, training, and then being in that environment and realizing, I'm okay. I'm coping. My equipment's working. My skills are working. My research is coming true. That is so satisfying. That's one of the main reasons I do this sort of thing, is to feel that autonomy, to feel the sort of, what's the word, ability that's within all of us. Because, normally you don't have to struggle too hard in these sort of quite novel ways to, have drinking water or be warm enough. Obviously we need to earn money, but once you earn money, water comes out your tap and the heating can be turned on. Whereas thinking, do I need a -30 sleeping bag or a -40 sleeping bag to be in the Pamirs, and looking up the climate for the last 10 years and the trends and wind direction and all this stuff, and then getting it right or getting it slightly wrong, but enough that it's not too dangerous. That's a really satisfying feeling.
Something I was just thinking, how I was joking about going between West Africa and Central Asia. I mean, that's the massive contrast, isn't it? Yeah. -30 or -40 sleeping bag to how on earth do I survive when it's 40 degrees Celsius, bearing sun, and there is no shade?
Yeah, I spent a lot of my West Africa trip saying to myself, Jude, you like the cold. Your next trip, you're going to the mountains. Because the cold is where I really thrive. I just love being in the cold. And the heat is great and fine. And I miss the sun, being back in the UK winter for sure. But the cold is, my body runs hot. And so it just works for me.
Did you have a 4-season tent?
No, I didn't. I had a 3-person tent, a little Terra Nova tent, super lightweight 1-person tent. And actually the whole side of the inside, one side of the inside was mesh. And actually, so...
Wow, if you could see my face.
Yeah. Well, I did something to try and help with that, which didn't help too much. But as a bit of a tangent, but it's relevant context, is that this whole trip cycling to India, I was raising money for a hospice. And I was raising money for this hospice because I'd asked my grandmother, is there a charity you care lots about? And she told me that there was this charity, St. Margaret's Hospice in the West Country, that had helped quite a few of her friends later in life who had cancer and so on. And then whilst I was on this trip, fundraising for St. Margaret's, my grandmother was admitted to this hospice, almost by chance. And so this gave me extra sort of drive to do this trip and to fundraise for St. Margaret's. And then when I was in Tajikistan in December, I'd sort of made my peace that I might not see my grandmother again because I knew she was not fully well when I left. But I got a text from my mum saying, just so you know, Nanny's probably only got a week left. And without thinking about it, I packed up my stuff and I flew home. And I flew home for about 3 weeks in the middle of this trip. It happened to be Christmas, which was great. I saw my grandmother one last time and I got to go to a funeral and I came back. to Tajikistan in January. And the reason that's relevant is that apart from being the story of the fundraising, in that time, my mum sewed a panel to cover the big window in my tent, because it was, as I said, a 3-man tent, and the whole side of the inside was just mesh, and it was so windy and cold was coming in. And I brought the tent back with me. She put Velcro all around the inside, and she made this panel. I would try and help keep the wind out. And I think it made a difference. It certainly wasn't a 4-man tent suddenly in terms of strength or wind coming under the fly. But yeah, I was really grateful to have that.
Jude, I could not imagine camping with a tent that's got one whole side of it that's mesh and internal in a Central Asian winter.
Yeah, so the minus 31 degrees night was I was camping just below the top of Akbaital Pass in the east of the Pamirs. I think it's the highest point on the Pamir Highway. And I had all my clothing on. I had my leggings, I had tracky bums, that's tracky bottoms, people who aren't from the UK. I had my ski trousers, which were effectively my winter trousers I bought in Tehran. And then, thermal layers on top as well, 2 pairs of gloves and a woolly headband. And I was inside my sleeping bag, which is rated to minus 30 degrees. But for those who don't know, a sleeping bag rating, if it says minus 30 degrees, what that means is a woman not wearing any clothes can survive in that sleeping bag for 6 hours at most, or at least in minus 30 degrees. So it doesn't mean you'll be comfortable at minus 30 degrees. It just means you could survive in it. Yeah. I remember that night. I was cold, but not so cold that it was a problem. And it felt really satisfying again to be like, just about nailed this. I'm a bit chilly, but I slept, most of the night.
Wow. Was that your coldest night of the trip?
That was the coldest. And I really enjoyed, I'm a big numbers person in a way. I had a digital thermometer that every night I put in my tent, and in the morning it would tell me what the minimum temperature was. And it said it went down to minus 31. And that thermometer was inside my tent. So I don't know what temperature it was outside. Probably also minus 31 because my tent was letting all the air in.
Just for context, do we have a global audience? We're talking minus 31 degrees Celsius, not Fahrenheit. There's a massive difference there. We're not talking just below zero here.
Yeah, no, it was quite cold, and it was, I hadn't done anything quite like that before. But again, it's a really satisfying thing to work out what's possible. I know I wouldn't be able to do minus 40 with that equipment, but I know that the minus 30s are doable.
Do you ever pine for that experience again? And I don't mean that particular night in the tent in that particular place, but do you ever find yourself thinking, I wouldn't mind doing something like that again?
Yeah, I mean, I spend most of my life thinking that. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, both in terms of wanting to recreate some of those feelings because it was all so new. And as I said, it was building and building, and it gave me such an incredible feeling inside of what I was doing. But then also just being out in the cold and minus 30 degrees now, we'll talk about it later maybe, but I'm planning some trips and for the future, and they all involve the cold. After that promise I made to myself in West Africa that I'd go somewhere cold next, I'm very much focused on cold weather trips, and I will be getting a 4-person tent for sure this time.
You're not yearning for another 40-degree sweat fest somewhere by any measure?
Well, it's funny because when I was in the Liberian rainforest, I remember thinking to myself, come on, Jude, this was stupid. You love the cold. This is really hard work. And I although I was really happy to be there in a sort of a type 2 fun way, I didn't tell myself don't come back, but I remember coming out of it and saying to my partner, yeah, that was great, but I'll probably never go back. And within about a week of landing, I was like, oh, I do quite miss the jungle. So it's funny how your perspective shifts on these things.
I know we talk about rose-coloured glasses, right, and rose-tinted lenses, but type 2 fun, I feel like that is beyond type 2.
Yeah.
I think that's type 2000, like seriously, and we'll get into the details of that one a bit later on. I wonder, Jude, if it's just the satisfaction of getting through something really, really hard.
I think there's lots to it. I think it's partly that. I think it's the things that you learn about yourself. And I don't just mean, what I'm capable of, but ways of thinking. And I think going into the Liberian jungle was somewhat of an unknown, and I didn't really know what it was going to be like, even though it was by choice. Whereas if I went there again now, I would remind myself a little bit more that it's all by choice. And when you remember that, it makes it all a lot easier to deal with the difficult bits. And I think for me, one of the key things from those sort of type 2 fun moments is the lack of choice, and thus the simplicity, and thus the peace. So what I mean by that is, I'm pushing my bike through the rainforest. It's grueling. It's 36 degrees. It's like 90% humidity. I haven't seen another person for 24 hours. There's no track. And I'm pushing and I'm pushing. And even when there is a track, there's like a fallen tree every 50 meters. So I'm doing about 9 hours work a day to move 7 or 8 kilometers. And I'm getting cut up by the bushes and ants are attacking my feet and all this stuff, whatever, just to paint a picture. But I realized quite quickly that I was like, I'm not complaining. There's no one to complain to. It's not that I didn't see the bad things that happen, like having like 20 ants on my right foot inside my sandal, really biting me. I realized that, that's a problem that I need to deal with, but you just don't view it so negatively because there was no phone signal, no one to talk to. My satellite phone broke. And so you just have a choice to complain. And so you just get on with it. And that's a great thing that I brought home, which is that I'm happy when I don't complain. That doesn't mean I never complain. I had a really sulky day 2 days ago. My mood just wasn't there. But when I can choose to, if I stub my toe now and someone says, "Oh, are you okay?" I appreciate the emotional support, but I almost don't want them to. I want to keep this feeling of like, I'm fine. I've got a bed, I've got water. And I'm not talking about mental health stuff. I'll always talk about that and share that. But in terms of the physical things now, I think those moments really give us insight into what works for us. And when you've got no choice but to get on with it, you realize that actually you're pretty capable of doing it, and you'll probably feel better for feeling that and not talking about all the little niggly things that happen.
Yeah, and I guess it just forces you to just get on with what you need to do, doesn't it? It really sharpens your focus on things. And maybe because your focus is sharpened, your awareness of everything around you is heightened as well. Going on to awareness,
Yeah.
There was a quote I came up, and I don't think this is your quote, but it came up reading your blog. Yeah. It was something that you were answering. This is, when you first put it out to the world that you're doing something and, what are the motivations behind it? And then you've written somewhere to say, I was trying to find a quote and I couldn't think of one. This is what I came up with online and it's good and I'll include it. And I read it, Jude, and I thought, I really love this. So I'm going to read it out now too. Bicycle touring is heightened awareness. It's the difference between standing awestruck in front of a painting or clicking past it on the internet. Now imagine this feeling every day, all day. Something as simple as the ground becomes very important. Is it level, soft, wet? You really begin to see the ground. You see people, you see landscapes and food, and you might even see yourself. I love that quote so much, but it almost talks to what we were saying there about that heightened awareness, that presence of totally observing everything.
Yeah.
You came across that quote before you set off. Did you ever think about it during your trip?
Did you know that family travel has the incredible power to shape our children's worldview and create lasting memories? In a world where representation is often lacking, it's essential for our children to see themselves reflected in every aspect of life, including the stories we tell about travel. Introducing the Travel of Legacy podcast, where we're rewriting the script by celebrating the diverse voices of Black and Brown family travelers. Each episode of Travel of Legacy is a testament to the enriching power and the joy of exploration in Black and Brown communities. So journey with us and subscribe now.
I don't know. I don't remember that. That's a great quote. I should use that again. Yeah, wow. I mean, I wrote a lot on that blog. That's the England to India blog?
Yeah, it is. And listeners, I'll put links to Jude's blog and his YouTube and socials in the show notes for you as well, so you can go and look at it. And I definitely encourage you to look through Jude's blog. It takes us back to what the internet was like back in 2012, 2013, when blogs really were the way of telling people about stuff. But yeah, like that's that quote, and maybe you weren't thinking about it, but when I read that out, does that resonate with you through your experiences?
Yeah, and this comes back to the last question about, why we do it and what happens to us in those moments. And I think, I touched on it, but simplicity is one of the things it's, that I value about a cycle tour. I really, really value the simplicity and realness of, I wake up in the morning and I need to think about, where am I going today? Where am I getting water from? Where am I getting food from? Where am I going to put my tent? And those are the only things that really matter. And, obviously along the way, you hope to have experiences and gorgeous views and so on. But I say that because when you think about our busy lives back in normality as such, there is so much going on. There's life admin, there's distractions, there's marketers trying to get you every second. And I just think our brains are happier when they've got simplicity of objectives and you're not being pulled around in 100 different directions. It's just peaceful. It's more peaceful. And that's why even if something goes wrong, even if your back wheel breaks halfway up a mountain pass, sure, that sounds kind of awful, but what you're dealing with is so simple in the sense of, I need to fix my back wheel, rather than in the UK, it might be like, well, I need to move some money from this bank account and then I'm going to get the train, but that might be cancelled. I'm going to go to this bike shop and do this thing. But in between that, I've got a doctor's appointment and all this stuff, which is all important. But my gosh, I've really noticed coming back to the UK and the life admin. And I just thought I really didn't miss this.
It's actually something that a few of my guests when they've completed big trips and then they've gotten back to their home, and some of them who have completed trips that have lasted years, and you'd probably resonate this, gotten back to what they have as well. And sometimes it's overwhelming just even dealing with all your possessions because, again, back to that simplistic thing that you've realised you don't need a lot day to day. You've lived without a lot, and then all of a sudden you come back and you're going, far out, what do I need all this stuff for? Maybe that wasn't you. Maybe you sold everything beforehand and you didn't have a lot to come back to. But
no, that was me.
That was you?
Yeah, so coming back from this trip, I don't remember the India one, but coming back from this one, I had all my stuff in boxes and I came back and I looked at this. I've got a box just of T-shirts, maybe 20 T-shirts and shirts, maybe 20 in total. And I looked at it, opened up, looked at it, and I closed it and put it back. And for the first week that I was back, I just wore the same 3 shirts that I had on my cycle tour through all of Africa. Because I thought, A, it sort of takes me there, and B, I don't need it. And to this day now, it's over a month since I came back, I only have 4 shirts in my drawer because I'm also, on one hand, I'm not willing to throw them away yet, but I'm also really not ready to accept that I need 20 T-shirts. So there's definitely an interesting conversation to be had around how long these lessons or outlooks last. And, the positive ones, how do we make them last? Maybe that one's slightly less important, or some people it'll be really important. But, everyone, you can go on a 1-week holiday and have insights and realizations, especially if it's a week holiday away from a stressful job. And then you come back and you're like, right, I'm doing this thing. I've got this new diet, this new outlook, or this new habit. And I said the key word there, unless you really make it a habit, the memories which drive those new outlooks will slowly fade. And thus your motivation to keep going at them will fade unless you can find a way to turn it into a habit. And so you do it sort of automatically. I'm very much in that stage now of the first few weeks back. I was on top of the world and I was like, I've got all these great new outlooks and they serve me so well. And I'm getting up earlier and I've changed my diet and I'm more active, blah, blah, blah. And I'm at the stage now where the raw fire inside from Africa is slowly going, a week of fire. And I'm having to really rely on being disciplined and making it a habit to keep them going. And I think that's a challenge a lot of people face.
I think sometimes also it's a reason why people then choose to do something big again and keep going too.
Yeah.
There's been some recent guests that they emailed me and sort of said this. In some degree, it's easier to live life by going out on another bike tour than just dealing with what life is like back at home. And I can understand that. But actually, Jude, it comes back to that whole thing you were talking about earlier, which is, simplicity, the simplicity of a tour, the type of problems you got to solve, the simple ones. You're not trying to fix something along with fitting it into a timeline of 10 different things that need to happen for you that day as well.
I think one of the key things, just quickly, it is, and this definitely has its downsides. So I'm not an advocate for being a total loner, but it's not relying on anyone else. So like one of my pet peeves is back home is, you call a customer service number and you get through to a robot and then eventually you might get through to someone and you need something from this company, their service you've paid for or whatever, and it hasn't worked, whatever it may be, or a parcel hasn't been delivered. Whereas on a cycle tour, you're only really relying on yourself and the people immediately in front of you, maybe a shopkeeper, maybe a border guard, but they're always right there. It's always tangible. And it's always face-to-face and very personable. And almost never, with the exception maybe of applying for visas online, almost never are you relying on some sort of outsourced call center or whatever it may be, or someone who needs to turn up at a certain time to do something for you. Again, this isn't something which I cherish when I'm away, thinking, oh God, I love not relying on anyone. But I do notice it when I come back and I'm trying to get on with my goals. And I think, I can't do that one right now because of X. And I can't do that one now because of so-and-so. And I definitely miss that about cycle touring.
You are the problem solver. Everything comes down to you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you did have some problems to solve. I think, we were talking about a wheel braking coming down a mountain. I think you had issues with your brake pads really, really disintegrating on you. I think you came across some cheap ones. I'm trying to think of whether this was in Tajikistan or whether this was in potentially Tibet.
Yeah.
You thought you were doing well buying 8 sets of brake pads for like 18 pence each or something. And then you realise why they were so cheap.
Yeah. Yeah, I gave myself quite a problem at the end of the Pamir Highway coming into the border with Kyrgyzstan, which again is a 4,000 something meter mountain pass. And I was at the top of this pass and it was getting late in the day and the snow and wind were really picking up. And I realized that my rim was broken. It just basically cracked, and it cracked because my brake pads had worn through to the metal that was within the brake pads underneath all the rubber. And I'd just been scratching metal on metal. And it's very hilly, obviously, in the Pamirs. And that was one of the other times I had to hitch a ride because I ended up hitchhiking across all of Kyrgyzstan. Actually, I hitchhiked to Osh, which was sort of a city 200 or 300 kilometers away, couch surfed for someone, left all of my bike there, but then took my wheel on a sort of several 100-kilometer hitchhike to Bishkek, the capital, and got my wheel repaired there. But then these things lead into the best adventures. I stayed there for 4 weeks. I stayed with a couch surf with a guy who was a tour guide. We climbed a glacier together. I met someone who was teaching English and she was going on holiday for 2 weeks. So I ended up teaching her class English for 2 weeks. These are the sort of adventures which you can't organize on the internet. You just have to go there and throw yourself in. And actually they happened off the bike just as much as they did on the bike.
You are right. You can't plan for these type of things, but when they happen, they're memories that last forever, but they become sometimes the trip highlights as well. All because you did buy the cheap brake pads,
Yeah, exactly.
Is it an assumption it was because the brake pads were cheap? Maybe no brake pads would last too long in that sort of terrain. I'm not sure.
For someone who cycled tens of thousands of kilometers, I am not the best at looking after my bike. I'm going to put it out there. I think I've got this mindset. I've got a really strong steel frame. I've got a Surly long haul trucker for those interested. And that frame is pretty much bomb proof. And I often don't oil my chain until it's absolutely grinding. And I will check my brake pads now and then. But as long as I'm moving forward and the bike's rolling, then I really just don't have a problem. I'm not super into bikes in the way of wanting to optimize everything. And speed really isn't a thing for me. I'm not a Lycra guy. I'm a sort of person who thinks, well, I've got 50 kilos of bike and luggage here, so I'm going to be slow. And I'm here to look up and enjoy the view. I changed when I got to Istanbul. I went to a bike shop and I asked them to get rid of the drop bars and put on mountain bike bars so I could look up more. I didn't care about weight or efficiency. I was just wanting to enjoy the ride.
You weren't doing this trip because you wanted to go on a long, long bike ride. You were choosing the bike to take you slowly through around the world in a way. Tibet. Did you always plan to go to Tibet? Because you quite rightly point out, you did spend some good amount of time there and you did it all illegally. Actually, let's just clarify. If someone wants to go cycling in Tibet, or at the time that you were there, what were the parameters for that to even be possible?
Yeah, very, very difficult then and now. So I think it hasn't changed much now, but I can only speak to what it was then, which was, so Tibet is, administered and part of China since the 50s, whether one agrees with it or not. It's the Chinese government you're dealing with. So you need a Chinese visa, first and foremost, which is relatively easy to obtain like other visas. And then you need a permit for going in Tibet, into the Tibet Autonomous Region. It's one of the sort of counties or states of China. And to get that in 2012 or 13, you needed to go with an official tour company. You needed to go with three other people, 3 other travelers, and you all had to be the same nationality. You were only allowed to travel in their Jeep on their pre-approved routes and visit their pre-approved sites. And when I say pre-approved, I mean pre-approved by the Chinese government. It may have been possible And this costs thousands of dollars per person, obviously. It may have been possible to say, cool, I'm going to do that, do it all legitimately, and I'm just going to cycle behind the Jeep. And then maybe you could do that. Not a huge amount of adventure in that for me, but I get some people like to cycle supported. It's totally valid. That's the legal way of doing it, if it is possible at all.
Clearly, there's a few parameters there that really make it impossible, not just the cost impost as well, but you went through a few countries there with Agustin, but he's not British and there's not 3 more of him, so failing on that requirement.
Yeah.
So then, okay, you realise that it's not going to be possible, but Tibet is still something you want to experience. How did you sneak your way for so long there and not get found and deported?
Yeah, I mean, well, the first thing to say to answer your previous question is whether I always planned to go to Tibet. And the answer is I didn't. I was going to go Iran, Pakistan, India. And actually, that's why I chose Amritsar, which is all the way west in India, almost on the border with Pakistan, because it's the first city in India. And I could sort of say and feel, cool, I've cycled to India without having to cycle another 3,000 kilometers. But whilst I was on my way to Pakistan, coming through Iran, Pakistan changed the visa requirements and they said you have to apply in your home country, which obviously wasn't possible for me because I was on the way. So again, talking about things going wrong, when things go wrong on the road, they're nearly always, unless you're being robbed, they're nearly always for the better. If I'd just gone to Pakistan, I would have gone Iran, southern Pakistan, straight into India. But instead, I had to go the whole way through Central Asia. So either Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, or my way, Afghanistan, and then Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. And Tibet was the last option. I had to. There was no other way to get into India. And, my cycle trip, my website, everything was englandtoindia.com. Like, that's my vibe. I'm going to India. So in terms of how I did it, there's a few people who've done it before who are extremely helpful. There's a guy called Jan Korax. If you want to see really, really old internet websites, and I mean like 90s, look up Jan Korax. He has cycled in Tibet dozens of times and done some real expeditions there. And I was in touch with him. I asked him, where are the checkpoints? So I knew that between sort of the north of Tibet, where I'd enter from Xinjiang, and the border with Nepal, that there'd be a few dozen checkpoints. And he knew where some of them were from cycling the previous years, and other ones you just have to spot as you come along. And the general approach is, if there's a big checkpoint, like the first one going into Tibet from Xinjiang, I'd know where it is, or I'd spot it, 500 meters ahead, and I'd pull off the road and I'd wild camp out of sight of the road. And then at sort of 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd set my alarm. Well, I set my alarm to wake me up at 3 or 4 in the morning, which is hard. It's Tibet. It's, I think, February or March, really cold, winds blowing a lot, and pack up my tent. And then it's a case of sneaking either through or around the checkpoints. And that can have its own challenges. So, Tibet is pretty hilly. So the roads will often be following a valley, which means there's a river. So you either are basically pushing a bike up a massive hill, totally out of sight of the checkpoint, which is pretty safe, or you're sneaking right past or right through the checkpoint. And I was incredibly fortunate. Sure, maybe it was a bit courageous, whatever to do, but I had so many instances where I could have been caught. I had dogs barking at me, dogs chasing me. I had to throw stones at dogs, but try and throw the stones quietly so that the checkpoint guards didn't hear them. All sorts of stuff like this. Those are sort of the nighttime ones. And then I guess there were 2 or 3 different levels of checkpoints. There's the military checkpoints, like those ones, which are pretty intense. And you've got the PSB, which is like the sort of security police. And then you also have the traffic police. And the traffic police were a lot less serious. And in those ones, I would just put my balaclava on, put my goggles on, which was fair clothing for the weather, because it'd often be blizzards, and I'd just cycle straight through. And the Han Chinese, the sort of majority ethnicity from China, are allowed to travel in Tibet without a permit. So I think the assumption is, and this is what I was working on, was that I would have been Han Chinese underneath my goggles and my balaclava.
Real incognito.
Yeah, real incognito. And I've got a real anti-authoritarian streak. And so it gave me huge satisfaction every time I'd get through. It was interesting, actually, because there was 2 Spanish guys. I was on my own by this point, but 2 different Spanish guys who were about a week behind me. They hadn't done the same research, but I was texting them all the checkpoint coordinates as I went through, and they didn't get one of my texts, and they got caught and deported. But that's on that point, though, because I think people think, it might be different now, but back then I kind of knew that you just get deported. And actually, when I say deported, they got sent to sort of, mainland China as such, China proper. They weren't put in jail for weeks, accused of being spies or anything. You just get taken out of Tibet. So, I wouldn't sneak through many countries' military bases intentionally. I think you're at real risk if you do that. But traveling through these checkpoints, I had a pretty good understanding for people who've been caught before that you're not going to get in too much trouble.
Yeah, you wouldn't have done it in Afghanistan. The photos, I mean, not just of Tibet, the whole trip, but the photos from your time there, wow. Do you look back at them and sometimes just to remind yourself of what you've experienced?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually, as I'm sat here, I'm looking at 8 photos I have on my wall from the trip to India, and I think at least half of them are from Tibet or around that time. And yeah, Tibet is the one place that like really sticks in my heart, and I can't think of anywhere else I've ever been where I really think to myself, I have to go back. But Tibet is one of those places like I just have to go back to Tibet. I went on the road, which is still pretty remote. You'd only get a few vehicles passing you per day. But the whole of it's called the Changtang Plateau, which it makes up the bulk of Tibet, is empty. It's all above 4,000 meters. It's pretty flat apart from these rolling hills that go up to 5,000 or 6,000 meters here and there. And for me, it's just the most beautiful place on earth. Because you're so much higher, the skies are deeper blue because there's less atmosphere, which means the water in all the lakes, and there are many lakes, are really deep blue. And it just gives me the sense of deep peace being there. And they call it the roof of the world, and it does feel like you're in a slightly different realm sometimes. And yeah, I need to go back at some point for sure.
What was it like being at that level of altitude? Like, were you acclimated, obviously, at that point? Like, it's not like you're, up for 4,000 meters every now and then you're going to descend back down to 1,000 meters or something. Like, you were at high elevation throughout, right?
Yeah, I think I spent a whole month above 4,000 meters. I got lucky on the gene pool or whatever it is. I've got good lungs, and I was reading about this the other day for a trip I'm planning, and some of it is genetics. Obviously, you can work out to try and improve aerobic function, but I think my lungs just serve me well and grab a lot of oxygen, and I never really had any trouble. I do remember the highest I went in Tibet, I went up this mountain pass, which wasn't a road. I pushed my bike up most of it. It was sort of a shortcut, although it certainly wasn't quicker. And I camped at the top of the pass at 5,600 meters, which was the highest point of my trip. And I remember lying down and I was perfectly relaxed, ready to go to sleep, not out of breath or anything, but I felt my heart and it was absolutely pounding. And your body does just work harder to like keep yourself going. But yeah, I never really noticed huge problems. I think once I was going above 4,000, 4,500, if it was particularly steep, you do start to notice that, oh, I just feel a lot weaker. This is harder to do. But I never got altitude sickness or anything like that.
I guess there's only one way to find out about altitude sickness, isn't it? And it does seem to be a bit of a lottery with people.
Yeah.
I know this will sound really bizarre, just what we've been talking about, big grand landscapes and all this sort of stuff, but there's always got to be a section of my podcast here on Seek Travel Ride where I talk about food. I don't want to sound silly, but I genuinely don't know what a typical meal in Tibet would be. What would it be? And, I know you were sneaking past checkpoints, but what were you eating there? Like, what was a typical meal like for you there in Tibet?
I mean, I kind of ate the same staple diet. I had 2 diets the whole trip. I had a European diet, and then in Asia, it was pretty much breakfast, bread, lunch, bread, dinner, instant noodles. I mean, it's just so lacking in nutrition, but that was it. Every night, 2 big packets of instant noodles, or there was like 1 or 2 big days where it'd be 3 packets. And then, I was rereading my blogs, and it would often be 3-day-old bread because, there's not shops for days and days. And I would buy loaves and loaves and loaves of bread at once and just stash them on my bike. And they'd just be so hard. But again, I don't remember complaining about it even in my head once. In Tibet and Xinjiang, i.e. in China, they have these sort of squeezy sausages in this like soft wrapper, and you can almost like really soft meat, maybe like spam, you sort of squeeze it out, and I got some protein from them, but it tastes like cat food to me sometimes. I think generally speaking, my nutrition on a cycle tour is awful. And I know it doesn't have to be that way. I know a lot of other people do it very differently. Although I would say that some countries or regions like Tibet or even West Africa lend themselves to it being really quite hard to get good nutrition.
I picture West Africa of having really good fruit, but am I wrong there or?
No, you're not wrong. Like so much is possible to be grown in West Africa. I don't know the reasons why, but certainly a lot of it to do with poverty. But there is so much rice grown. Along the coast, you can get fish. Sadly, I don't eat fish, which I know is very much on me, so hence not complaining about it. There are so many vegetables that can be grown, and you'll often sort of go through a village and they'll just have one type of vegetable which you won't have seen for a month, and so you stock up on it. But there's no sort of consistent sort of food stuff you can buy there, apart from, again, you can't even buy it. They're growing a lot of cocoa, they're growing a lot of coffee, and they're growing a lot of rice. The rice is for them to eat, the cocoa and the coffee is for export, and there's very little of anything else, apart from occasionally finding a mango from Guinea or bananas maybe here and there.
Again, very different to what I'm sort of thinking about too. I mean, sometimes, your meals that you're having on these trips, they are simple as well because, I mean, let's face it, you were talking about Central Asia, you're there in wintertime. It's not like you're going to be finding lots of fresh stuff to eat. It's going to be staples that are going to sustain you for your travels as well.
Yeah.
Jude, being up at high elevation, your body, like when you returned home, and I realise I've skipped across India here and I've transported you back to London now, your body must have just been ravaged being at that high elevation for so long. And it's not like you weren't active at high elevation. You had some massive days.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird actually. On that trip to India, I didn't lose much weight, I don't think. Maybe it's just the enormous amount of carbs I was putting on into me. I did come home ravaged, but that's because I came home with typhoid and giardia simultaneously, which on their own, either of those are really quite nasty. But at that point, I lost some weight, but for not the right reasons.
No. Oh, my gosh. What a way to end a trip. That would have been horrendous.
Yeah, it was a real shame because I was flying from India back to London via Kuwait. That's just where my flight stopped. And my plan, so my parents lived in Somerset, which is about maybe, 150 miles from London. My plan was to build my bike at the airport in proper independent cycle tourist fashion and cycle home, even though my parents wanted to pick me up. But I was like, no, imagine that moment where I cycle down the driveway. I'd been picturing it for months, how emotional that would be with my parents waiting there and like cycling in and like getting on my knees and giving them a hug, and not because on my knees in celebration as opposed to them being really short.
Yeah.
And I got to Q8 and I remember texting my dad and I just had this pounding headache. And I said, something's not right. Can you pick me up? They picked me up and I spent 2 or 3 days in bed. And then I went to hospital. And yeah, I was quarantined before it was cool to be quarantined. I was in my own room for 5 days and it was not fun. It was mostly the typhoid, which wasn't fun at that point. I had a fever, so my temperature was really high, but I felt freezing. And the nurses insisted that I could only have a thin sheet and I had to have a fan on me the whole time, even when I was shivering cold. So those were some of the least fun days. Yeah, I was just very grateful to have good healthcare at that point.
What a way to finish a trip off as well. Far out. I guess it's one thing to arrive back in London, but what was it actually like to arrive in your final destination town of India?
Yeah, it was really interesting. It was a great feeling. It was also one of those things where when you try quite hard for something to be climactic, it often doesn't work. And so I'd intentionally camped about 20 kilometers away from my destination. So my destination was the Golden Temple, which is like the most holy site for Sikhs in Amritsar, in the state of Punjab. And I thought, I had a vision in my head of getting to the Golden Temple, and I thought I'd get there really early so it's not too busy. I'd take all the bags off my bike and I'd hold my bike above my head, for a sort of classic moment and get someone to take a photo. But yeah, so I woke up at sort of 5 a.m. and on the 20-kilometer cycle to the Golden Temple, I had 4 punctures, which is just unheard of. And they were all genuinely unique punctures, things entering my tyre each time, which I had to pull out and patch up. And so by the time I got there, it was heaving. And regardless, they said, you can't take your bike in. I had somewhat planned for this. So my backup plan was in Kathmandu, I got a T-shirt made with the flags of all the 18 countries I'd been through. And so I just went, I put that T-shirt on, I got a photo there. But to answer your question more directly, what was it like? I remember it being a great moment. I also just have this like really strong feeling at the time of like, this isn't the trip. This moment isn't what the trip's about. Like, yes, it's an ending and it's a bit emotional, but it's called England to India, but it's everything that happened in between that mattered. That temple in India and that start point in England are really not so important. But we focus on these endpoints as if they're the big moments, and that they're not really. They're not where the value is. They're not where the substance is. And so I did find it, somewhat underwhelming compared to what I'd expected. But I was also really proud. There's no doubt of that.
Yeah. I think we were talking about this before we press record, and I'd mentioned it's rare that I interview a guest and I haven't tallied up how many countries did they go to, what was the total distance, how much time did it take. And I haven't done that for either of your trips, Jude, and I think it's because in researching and in looking through what you've put out there about your trips, it was really clear to me that it wasn't about that. Even though on your blog, I think you did have like a daily distance travelled stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sort of seems quite insignificant now to even talk about that. I have to ask because we've overtly said it. So 18 countries, what was the total distance in the end?
Yeah. So on that is 18 countries if you count Tibet as a separate country, which I very much did at the time because I'm very idealistic. Otherwise 17 if you include it in China. The total distance was around 17,000 kilometers.
Yeah, not insignificant. And it almost was like a whole year, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 13 months, but that includes 4 weeks back home when I visited my grandmother when she passed away. So a year, just over a year, quite a long time really.
Yeah, a lifetime of experiences. So that is where we will leave episode 1. As I mentioned at the start of the show, episode 2, which I will release to you next week, goes into the depths of Jude's experiences in West Africa. He has some amazing stories to tell, especially about his time spent in the Liberian jungle. In the meantime, I definitely encourage you to click the links in the show notes to check out Jude's social media profiles and especially watch those videos he has put up on YouTube, which will give you some more insights into his West African story when you hear that episode released next week. Now, if you are enjoying Seek Travel Ride, be sure to subscribe to the Seek Travel Ride newsletter so that you can get some more information about what's coming up on the show. I send a newsletter out each and every month, and within it I share who the future guests are going to be coming up and a little bit more about what you can expect to hear from their journeys. It's also a way for me to share some more details about the Seek Travel Ride community, about some of the people who are listening to the show and your travels as well, not to mention how you yourself can get involved in the Seek Travel Ride podcast too. To sign up to the newsletter, just hit the link in the show notes and you will receive Seek Travel Ride news every month direct to your inbox. Until the next episode, my name's Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.